Well, welcome everybody to another episode of Integration Insider. Today we've got an exciting guest with us, Kent Weare from Microsoft directly. He is the Principal Product Manager for Logic Apps. We're excited to get a demo from him today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Our pleasure. So this is episode 2 in our series of MuleSoft migration, demystifying the migration process. So we're excited to have Kent. Thanks for taking the time today, Kent. We're excited to see this demo. In our previous episode, we really dug into MuleSoft flows versus Logic App workflows, showed the similarities there. So we're excited to have you hearing from the horse's mouth directly from Microsoft. So maybe to kick it off, just tell us a little bit about you and your role, just to give our audience a little bit of a taste of you, and then we'll kick off the demo. We're really excited to get to that.
Sure, sounds good. Yeah, so thanks for having me once again. Hi everyone, my name's Kent Weare. I'm a principal PM manager on the team. I do lead the product management side of things for the Logic Apps product itself. I've been with Microsoft for over 5 years. I've spent part of that time on the Power Platform, and then I've been on the Logic Apps team for about 2.5 years. But prior to joining Microsoft, I spent the vast majority of my career in the integration space, having been a Microsoft MVP and working on a lot of integration projects in the energy sector in Western Canada.
And you're based in Calgary, right? That's exciting. Okay. Well, we're excited to have you. Questions for him?
No, I think I'm also excited to see the demo and talk about it. I've been interacting with Kent along the way here, so I'm really excited to see it.
Okay, then with that, let's just get right to the demo. So Kent, you take over, you share screen, and this is your show now.
All right, you see it?
Yeah, we got you now.
Okay.
Perfect. Yeah, you're in control.
Okay. All right, so one of the questions that we sometimes get is, being a Microsoft product is how do we integrate with other services, other platforms, other SaaS applications? And certainly Salesforce is a, fairly popular SaaS platform that does exist. And naturally that question comes up is, hey, can you integrate with Salesforce? And so that's a demo that I'm going to show here today. What we do is we have a fictional company here called Fourth Coffee. And what we do is we sell coffee. We sell coffee to other large organizations who needs to, provide coffee to their staff or their customers. And now what ends up happening here, I love coffee too. What ends up happening here is that we do have multiple systems, line of business systems in place here. We've got Salesforce, which is our system of record for our accounts, our contacts, and our opportunities are basically our agreements. And then what we need to do is we need to integrate that with Dynamics for another part of our company. And so that's what I'm going to go ahead and do here. I'm going to go ahead and create a new opportunity. All right, so what we've got here is Fourth Coffee has a customer called Contoso Construction. And Contoso Construction puts in a monthly order for coffee for their organization. And so what we're going to do here is we're just going to call this the Contoso coffee order for September. And we can see that we've got the account name already selected here. And what we're going to do is this is an existing customer. We've got a relationship with them and we're going to upgrade it. And, they like to phone us and we'll then go ahead and place the order for them. Now, in this case, they drink a lot of coffee. So they drink like about $35,000 of coffee every day. And they want this, to be closed today. Now, in this case...
They need their coffee yesterday.
And in this case, they are negotiating us a little bit. So they're haggling with us a little bit. So we got to just get final approval on a last particular price here. But I'm going to go ahead and save this opportunity and then go talk to my boss to see if we can give them the price that they're looking for. So in this case, nothing is triggered yet from an integration perspective. Even though we've got an opportunity entity that has been updated or saved, created, nothing's triggered from an integration perspective. And so we can go and just take a quick look at that. And if we hit refresh, we should see that we don't have any new records created. The last record was last night at 6:30 p.m. So let's go back into Salesforce, and we've got the pricing sorted out, and we're got this address. We can now say that this is now closed or won. So now what's going to happen here now is we've got a workflow, and I'll certainly show you that workflow that is going to subscribe to, I need to save this as well. It is going to subscribe to opportunities that have been updated where the stage is set to closed won. Then what we need to do when we have an opportunity like this, we have some additional integration that we need to be able to fulfill. There's naturally an account behind this. And in this case, we've got the account name is Contoso Construction. And as part of that particular account, we also have contacts. Now, in this case, we just have one, but we could have multiple contacts here as well. So in this case, we're dealing with Jack Roberts, and Jack is the buyer from Contoso itself. So in this case, what we would expect when we flip over to Logic Apps is that we've got this orchestrated process that has taken place that will subscribe to those opportunities when they've been won, then subsequently fetch the account information, and then we'll go ahead and sync that information with Dynamics. Similarly, we need to do the same thing from a contacts perspective as well. So let's flip over to Logic Apps and we'll take a peek. So if we go ahead and just hit refresh here, we've seen that this has run, right? This ran just a few seconds ago. It took 14 seconds in total. So let's just take a quick look at the designer here first, and then we'll go ahead and take a look at the execution
Maybe just
itself.
Before you jump over to the designer, can you go back to so we see that run happen, like the actual execution? I'm going to try to stay earnest to, again, demystifying somebody looking to migrate off of MuleSoft. That's what these series is fundamentally around. And this was one of the things that I wanted to highlight was it's this operational perspective, right? So how do we see these executions? How, in the MuleSoft ecosystem, I found I was constantly having to go through log files. I was trying to, try to find that instance that ran as a Java, call stack, if you will. But here, can you just highlight a little bit what's going on from an operational perspective? How did you know it ran? And then some of the features you're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big fan of this feature. And this feature has been in Logic Apps since day one. So kudos to the people who came before me that put this together. I like to call it like follow the breadcrumbs, because it is so important, especially when you have like integration or middleware or iPaaS. You're generally in the middle of multiple systems. And having robust logs is critical, in my opinion. Now, in the past, that can be quite difficult with some legacy middleware because you need to store that somewhere. And sometimes that's in a database, and sometimes that can be quite cumbersome. But what's happening here, it actually serves two purposes. This is a stateful workflow. And as part of that workflow, we have this checkpointing that takes place. So after each of these different, in this case, this is a trigger, the beginning part. And then subsequently with all of these actions, what ends up happening is we go ahead and we persist this data to storage. And so this provides sort of two mechanisms. One, it gives you that operational visibility that you're looking for. The other thing is that this allows for durable message delivery. So in the event that we've got like downstream systems that have transient connectivity issues or might be offline, this allows us to persist the messages so that we can go ahead and do retries. And it's one of those things where you don't have to worry about message loss from that perspective. Now, conversely, we do have what we call stateless for customers where speed is the top priority. And if there's transient failures downstream, you would go ahead and reprocess those messages. But in this case, we're talking about stateful. So here what we can see is, like I said, follow the breadcrumbs. In this case, this represents the message payload that was received from Dynamics. And naturally, there's some interesting information here. This is the opportunity ID. We now have an account ID. This is something that we will then use subsequently to go get the account information. But this is that follow the breadcrumbs. The other thing that we do is this red light, green light show where you can see actions that have succeeded. You can also see the duration for those actions as well. So that's naturally something that's quite useful if you've got a piece of your workflow that is taking a lot of time, you can easily go ahead and determine which is the piece where there's that bottleneck. And then you can go ahead and seek to optimize it from that perspective.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's much easier than within Anypoint Studio at each stage being able to see that log.
Mm-hmm.
And I think this just is all about, like, one of our core tenets is like lowering that barrier of entry to participate in integration, whether you are developing or even when you're supporting, because this is something that's fairly universal, right? Like, as you understand this flow of the message and this experience, you can, easily identify and support multiple interfaces or multiple logic apps because you're building it in a fairly consistent manner.
Right. You get to actually see the flow in real time almost. All right. Whereas we have this thing in my bathroom, my daughter's bathrooms, that says integrity is doing the right thing when nobody's watching. And I twist that and I say integration, almost the same thing. Like, nobody ever gets to see it, right? It's, as long as it's doing its thing, it's hidden, everybody's happy. But when things start to go sideways, it's hard to figure out what really happened. So these stateful flows are really, really important for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then in the event that you do need to resubmit, you are able to resubmit as well. And once again, we will take advantage of the storage so that basically you would reprocess with like the actual data that was previously captured from that perspective.
Right. So I guess, again, staying earnest to comparables, if we look at the MuleSoft ecosystem, I think you would have to back this type of capability with something like a message broker for guaranteed delivery, durability of that message, with retry logic, implementing your own retry logics, just for that fault tolerance, really. But in here, we just select stateful and we kind of get this out of the box, if you will.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is all out of the box.
Yeah.
Now, another sort of interesting piece here is this represents the run, the execution of the workflow. But then there's also this notion of like, hey, how do I know that my trigger is actively listening for messages? And that's what you can see here is basically a series of logs that says, oh, I know that there was looking for messages against Salesforce. And then here's the one that actually fired itself. And you can see that, skip, that just means that there's no data available. When you see these ones, it's kind of interesting. There were events that were listened for, but they were basically filtered out. So let me just go ahead and just show you what that means if I go into the designer. So here we've got the trigger, and I've got a connection to my Salesforce instance. I'm looking now for any updates. So when a record is modified, and in this case, I'm looking for the opportunity entity. Now, if I head over to settings, I can write a simple expression that is basically going to look for a message received where the stage name is equal to closed one. And if that is the case, then we will proceed down with the rest of the workflow. Otherwise, we're going to filter that out, filter at source. That's always a good pattern. And basically not even sort of process that particular message. So that's one of those ways where we can differentiate these records, and you don't have to have a lot of that kind of logic of if this, then do it. You can avoid that and just filter it all out and keep your logs and your executions a little bit cleaner from that perspective. So next up is we've just got a series of actions that's going to help us with some of that processing that I had mentioned before. Here, I've just got a variable just to help me store the account ID. I will use that in a few different places, so I'm just going to go ahead and persist that. As I mentioned in the intro, I do need to go ahead and get the account for Contoso that's coming out of Salesforce. I'm just going to go ahead and get a record. Once again, I can choose from the different entities that are available in Salesforce. I'm going to filter, once again, filtering at source, and I only want to find records where the account ID is equal to the one that was passed in. I'm going to do something similar with the contacts, except I want them, it's the field name is going to be called account ID instead of ID. And same idea, I'm going to go ahead and then filter those things out. Now, when I go ahead and talk to Dynamics, I'm going to do so through the use of the Dataverse connector, which is kind of the underlying data platform for Dynamics. And similarly, we've got entities that exist inside of Dynamics. So what I'm going to go do is look for a particular account based upon the account name, which is basically the ID, in and basically see if I can go ahead and find it. And if I do find it, what I will go ahead and do is update that entity, and I will take advantage of all of this content that was provided to me from Salesforce, and I will go ahead and update the account in Dynamics. If not, basically it doesn't exist, I'm going to go ahead and add a new record to the accounts table. And when it's a new account, then I'm also going to go ahead and get a new account ID, which I'll need to use subsequently downstream as well. So next up, we need to deal with the contacts. So once again, for each contact coming from Salesforce, we're going to go do a similar process. We're going to see if that contact exists based upon their email address. If the email address is there, we will go ahead and update it based upon the latest information from Salesforce. Otherwise, what we'll go ahead and do is we will add it based upon the Salesforce information that you can see here. And then the next step is we need to do this relationship. We need to establish the relationship between the actual contact and the account. And that's what this specific action will do. This is provided by Dataverse, and it allows you to relate data across different entity types itself. So that's one way that you can go ahead and do that. And then here, these are just some exception handling. Up top, I've got this. We have this notion called scopes, and they kind of provide a couple different mechanisms. One is they can allow you to help manage your canvas, right, by being able to collapse and expand with your logic. But the other thing is you can kind of look at it as kind of like your traditional programming languages where you have try and catch scopes, and you can go ahead and include a bunch of different logic in your try step. And then in the event that it fails, then what you can do is have another scope that will go ahead and respond to it. So you create these scopes. They're fairly generic concept, and then you can choose its behavior. So in this case, we've got this scope, this catch scope, and it will only run if this try has timed out, skipped, or failed. And in the event that that is the case, we can go ahead and get the error message using a built-in function called result from our try scope. And that will then be able to log all of the related information. This is more of a placeholder. I'll show you this inside of business process tracking. This just helps me signal that the overall process is complete. So any other questions just around the demo there?
No, I think maybe just to highlight a couple things. It looks like here leveraged a couple good connectors. You have the Salesforce connector and the Dataverse connector that kind of supports this low-code concept, right?
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the sort of mechanisms that allows you to build these rather quickly. This is something that took me, probably about an hour or two, in order to sort of build this whole experience.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, we appreciate you building it for us.
Yeah, no worries.
Part of, it seems like every time I read the number of connectors, it bumps up by another 100. I think last I read was 900, then 1,000. This is part of that collection catalog of 1,000 plus connectors.
Yeah, absolutely, and that is true. We're well over 1,000 now. I don't know the exact number, but what we do see here is, and this is, I think, speaks to a little bit of like the breadth and depth of Microsoft, is that we've got these what we call managed connectors or Azure connectors that you're seeing here on screen, and these are shared with the Power Platform. So Not only do we have connectors that are being built for the integration audience, but we also have this audience for the Power Platform. So you've got Power Apps and Power Automate and Virtual Agents, now Copilot Studio. And so there's a massive surface area here for people that are using these connectors. And it's one of those things is, as these sort of connectors are built for specific use cases, they then become available to the family. And so Logic Apps, we're kind of in this unique situation because of our Logic Apps standard offering, which is actually a single tenant experience. it allows us to provide the best of both worlds. So when we see these Azure connectors here that I'm showing you right now, those are hosted in Azure, and those are broadly available, as I mentioned. But there's some things that come with that because of the nature of those other services being multi-tenant. They are hosted in Azure, and as a result, there are going to be some constraints on rate limiting to ensure that the service is running smoothly and that you don't have noisy neighborhood situations. But with Logic Apps, we also support what's referred to as in-app, or what we also call it as built-in. And so these are going to be unique to Logic Apps standard. Now, most of these will have their counterparts in the Azure Managed side of the world, but in this case, these run in your own runtime. And so what this allows you to do is have even more scale, more throughput, and also VNet connectivity so that you can actually keep this traffic private. So if you are talking to, say, a SQL server, that SQL server is part of a VNet that you can connect to with your Logic app. Now you can go ahead and isolate that traffic. Same with SAP or your Key Vault. We've got a custom code feature here as well. HTTP is naturally quite popular. And a lot of sort of the use cases where scale is involved, we would recommend using the standard version or the built-in version of that connector in Logic App Standard, which just gives you even more enterprise capabilities.
Yeah, no, appreciate you highlighting that.
Yeah. So another area that I did want to chat about is something that's relatively new. And this example, I think is a pretty good example of sort of business process tracking. So naturally, if you are, say, a business user and you are responsible for data integrity, the synchronization of all of this data would be a top priority for you, and you would want some visibility into this. You also might be interested in like the value of these opportunities that are actually being emerged. And that might be something that you want to be able to see as well. Now, as a business stakeholder or business SME, you're not interested in coming into a technical tool like this to go hunting through logs. And so to help address this particular need, we've introduced a service called Business Process Tracking that brings business stakeholders into the solution. Now, I'm going to just show a couple slides and then I'll show the demo here as well. And so the whole goal here is how do we take this important business data and expose it to those stakeholders? Because they're stakeholders for a reason. Like, you don't just build integration for the sake of integration. It's because you're solving a business problem. Now, what we want to do is that we want to involve like the business subject matter experts. They're the ones that typically know the process the best. And they're also the ones that know what data they're interested in. As we see integration, there can be some very large messages with, tens or hundreds of different fields. Some of those are going to be more important than others. So how do we focus on just the data that helps drive the business itself? And so what we've done is created an experience that allows like a business analyst to come and define a conceptual business process through different stages, stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, etc. And for each of those stages, what are the key data properties that are of interest at that particular point in the process? Then at this point, with our business process defined, we can then bring in the developers in a fusion development type manner and have the developers perform that technical mapping between those conceptual stages and the actual implementation itself. So how do we go ahead and extract the key data from those specific points in the workflow in order to then capture the data for the business? And so that mapping takes place. They go ahead, they deploy the business process. And what we create under the hood is some tracking profiles, which is kind of like instructions to the runtime engine to go ahead and extract this data at key points, and then go ahead and emit or push it to Azure Data Explorer. Now, we very deliberately chose Azure Data Explorer. Number one, it is a large-scale telemetry platform. Microsoft, we use it all over the place. It has high throughput, it has reliable delivery, and it has a very powerful query engine based upon Kusto query language, KQL. But the other thing is that we deliberately chose ADX and allow customers to bring their own ADX. So basically bring your own connection string. it's your data, right? We're not trying to lock up your data and then further monetize it. It's more about how do we then expose it to you. So I'm going to show you an out-of-box experience where we show you an example of the business process and we overlay that on top of your transactional data. But you are fully welcome to go ahead and extend this using tools that a business user would be familiar with, Power BI, for example. Or if you're more in the Azure side of things, an Azure Monitor workbook as well. And so this is just a view of this, and I'll get into the demo as well, but we recently introduced some new capabilities around like the business process stage status. So the ability to differentiate between a successful stage or a failed stage. Now, it could be failed for a couple reasons. It could be failed for a technical reason, or it could be failed for a business reason. Now, in this case, this example here, there was a safety check that took place for an energy use case. And if that failed, that is a failed business process that needs to be looked at. And so what we're able to then do is go ahead and sort of indicate, once again, through like a red light, green light show that, hey, this has failed. And naturally, you can write queries against all of this and then surface alerts. And so I've got some resources on those use cases as well. So let's flip over to the demo, and I'll show you this in real life.
Yeah, maybe before you jump into the demo, I'll just kind of take a run at it myself, because that was a lot. And I mean, It's so subtle, but it's so powerful in my mind's eye. It's kind of like conceptually, and correct me if I'm wrong here. So we, as the implementation team, we build some integrations over time. So, throughout the years, we build these integrations, to your point, to solve business processes that cross multiple systems. That's really what we do as integrators, if you were to summarize it. But that integration is actually valuable, but how do you surface like the data that's really in the process that's important? So in my mind's eye, what you've done here is you've said, okay, we've built up a catalog of integrations over years, but now I'm interested in what actually is happening. So you've kind of, in this business that's tracking, is you've kind of introspected it. You've overlaid something to start surfacing those events in a meaningful way. So it's not as detailed as the integration, but it's the data that's in that that's important. And then we take that data and we put it somewhere to be used for building applications and BI. And again, it's your data. You can do what you want with it, but we've surfaced it through the integrations. All that data is now available for use later. Is that a good way of it?
Okay. Yeah, absolutely. And I think this isn't like a novel concept by any means, but I think what ends up happening is that, we usually end up seeing a lot of customized solutions to try to solve this particular problem. And naturally, that doesn't always scale that well. And then you get some inconsistencies. And I would say another thing that we oftentimes also see is then people embedding this logging into the middle of their workflow. And then heaven forbid, like that piece ever failing, then your workflow failing because of the monitoring or the telemetry that you were trying to extract. And so and then if you ever have to go back and retrofit something, then you're touching every one of your workflows. And so this was a core principle for us, was the ability to layer this on top of your existing solutions. So to your point, customers that have built up this sort of library of interfaces, how do they now go take advantage of this without reworking everything, right? That was a core goal. But certainly if you're doing greenfield, I think that's the sweet spot where you can kind of think of this more from a business process perspective up front, as opposed to like playing from behind. But either way will work from that perspective.
Yeah, fantastic.
And so what the business process tracking is it is a top level Azure resource. So if you do come in here and search for business process, you're going to see business process tracking show up here. You do go ahead, you create this resource. There are no charges for this. There are charges obviously for ADX, as that being sort of something that's running in your organization, but there is no sort of charge for the business process tracking capability. We do, under the hood, take advantage of your compute in Logic Apps Standard to go emit this data. So you're already paying for that. So we're not trying to double ding you, and there's no additional charges for that. So let's head over to the editor first, and you can kind of think of this a little bit like Visio. So this is something that I've already built before, but it's kind of like Visio in the sense that I go ahead and construct what a business process looks like. And I can simply just go ahead and add stages. And for the stage, I need to provide a name. Let's call this stage 2. And then I go ahead and add properties. And what's recently been added is this notion of success versus failure. So if there were conditions where you wanted to be able to track the success or the failure, you can go ahead and implement this. Success is mandatory. Failure is something that is optional. So I go ahead and I would select that. And then what I need to be able to do is I need to map this to my technical solution. So I just go ahead and flip over this toggle. And then I need to provide the location of a workflow. So I can choose the subscription, the Logic app, and the workflow. This works across multiple subscriptions, multiple Logic apps, multiple workflows. And in this case, I just have that single workflow. But if I had multiple workflows, no impact. Then what I go ahead and do is click on select the data source. And what we're going to do here is we're going to go ahead and load a read-only version of that particular workflow. So this becomes, once again, like that usability side of things where it's like, okay, I'm familiar with the workflow designer. I know that there's data in there. Why don't I take advantage of some of the existing tools that already exist? So I can do a search here for opportunity, and it'll then filter out those opportunity fields that I might be interested in. And then same thing, properties, I could find other properties. And I can also take advantage of expressions as well. So if there was maybe I needed to do to lower string, I can go ahead and combine, these different expressions and chain them together as well and go ahead and add them. Now, I'm not going to save this, so I'll just delete this. But what we also have here is support for parallelism or conditions. They kind of work similar. So in this case, we're either going to go down the path of an account being updated, or we're going to go down the path of account being created. And so in that case, just one of these will light up. Now, we could also have parallel where both of them would light up. Kind of depends on your process. And then we've got, the context being processed and the process being complete. Now, with this one, I did want to be able to indicate whether or not it was successful or failed. And previously I showed you that scope, the try scope and the catch scope. And so this is a situation where for the failure, I want to capture those exception details. And so then what I can go ahead and do is map this to that second scope. And in this case, we've got the compose exception that's taken place. And we're just going to go ahead and get the outputs of that particular action. Now, in that action, I did have that expression for results. I could also embed that same expression here, and I would have the same outcome from that perspective. So yeah, that's how you would go ahead and construct the business process. We do support this validation gesture and the deployment gesture. And then once this is deployed, then this is live. We will put a tracking profile into those Logic apps that you've selected, and then we'll start to track that information. Now, if we want to see the output of it, we just go ahead and click on this transactions view here. And we do see that at 1025, we did have that execution that take place. Now, what binds this together is you do need kind of a correlation ID. Now, in this case, I've chosen the opportunity ID that came from Salesforce as that particular value. So that's why this might look a little unconventional, but it is a unique value, and you do want to make sure you have a unique value. So for this particular opportunity, I can see, the name of the opportunity, right? It was the coffee order for September. I can go ahead and get the opportunity value. In this case was 35,000. The opportunity date, the ID, and also the account ID from Salesforce. So if I ever needed to go look back, I could do it. This is something that's new that I really appreciate, and that's, okay, great. This is sort of the business view, but how do I get to the technical view? So we now have this launchpad that will take us right to that execution. So if you need to do further troubleshooting, you can go ahead and do that. That's a nice little touch that we recently added that I'm a big fan of. The other thing is oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that really is. That makes it a lot easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so here, what we're doing when the account's created, I'm just going to capture the dynamics account ID. that's been created. Obviously, I can capture whatever I want. Same thing with the contacts. Because you've got this account, multiple contacts that could be updated, that could be created. I just said contacts processed and capturing the number of contacts that were processed related to it. And then same thing with like, was the process complete? And in this case, we didn't have any particular issues from that perspective. So yeah, this is the default view. But once again, this data is all underneath ADX. And so if this was something where you wanted to be able to go ahead and construct your own dashboard, enrich this with other data as well, certainly you can do that using a tool like Power BI, and then really sort of get that customization experience that you might be looking for, but without having to build the whole plumbing in order to achieve those goals.
Yeah, I mean, a little bit of feedback for you is what we're seeing with our customers. We've had customers come back and really this is where business analysts meet the integrators.
Yep.
So we're seeing the business analysts actually coming into this tool and building these versus having to rely on a technical. There's some liaisoning back and forth discussions around the data, discussions a little bit about the integrations, but they take it and they run with it, right? So to your point, being able to build more rich, more visibility, and some of the stuff we're seeing is pretty impressive. But it's neat from our perspective that this is where the business analysts are actually picking this up in the integration world.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that was definitely a goal, and definitely when we were building this, I would say we took some inspiration from some other technologies. Like inside of Dynamics, there is this concept of like business process flow, where you have very specific stages. And as part of those stages, there's different data that you need to sort of populate typically. But it's kind of takes you down a path. And so we definitely took some inspiration from there. And I would also just say from RPA as well. I spent some time working on RPA with Power Automate. And it was kind of the same notion of like how important the business outcome is. And I think with integration, sometimes we get lost in that. We think about nuts and bolts and we think about just transactions and throughput. And we're like in the back office of IT. And it's more of like, no. Like there's valuable information here. What's important to your business stakeholders? And how do you give them that visibility? And they are typically the ones that know the process the best. So it just made sense to like loop them in and include them as part of this experience.
Right. Yeah. Fantastic. Are you seeing folks use some of this data almost to help enrich like an LLM or something like that? Like I could see the art of the possible already. Like these events are happening across your network, or this business data, business events. That's got to be a way for us to leverage that downstream, right? To get it in so that we can use tools around AI to really start surfacing some ideas.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely some relationship here with this, and we've done some exploration, with the LLMs, because we do have that support for the Azure OpenAI connectors, that are available. They're now GA, and so I kind of look at it as sort of they solve, I think, two different functions in my mind. So with the LLM, typically those are great for like exploratory and insights, right? Versus like hardcore transactional analytics. So I kind of look at these as kind of they complement each other, not so much one replaces the other. Because I think, and this is something, an area of exploration for us is like, as we collect all of this rich, important, valuable information in ADX, are there then opportunities to expose a way to sort of, explore that data using an LLM and this ability to do sort of ad hoc queries against the data itself. So, if you say, hey, in an LLM, how many orders, have this much value, sometimes that's not its sweet spot, but its sweet spot in terms of like, hey, what, where are the areas I should be looking? Or especially when you have tickets and you're trying to find like this causal relationship between one instance and another instance, that's where they really thrive, is I think in some of that unstructured data. So what I've done in the past is, ingested integration data into an LLM and then use business process tracking to sort of fact check some of it too, right? Where you can say like, did this hallucinate? And it's like, well, there's no hallucination in the business process tracking. But on the flip side, it's a very sort of structured sort of data set. And so when you do queries, like those are queries that have to be constructed and you have to know the schema of the data. The beauty of the LLMs is that I don't need to know the structure of the data, and they're very good at being able to sort of disassemble and reason across different sources of data. But there's definitely, a sweet spot for using them together.
Yeah, fantastic.
Well, that's a good segue into roadmap, new features, where you're kind of going on the roadmap with Logic Apps. I mean, we talked before we hit record on the call about some of the new AI integrations between what Microsoft and you're doing, specifically between Logic Apps and AI. But let us know what is on the roadmap for Logic Apps. Give us something you haven't told anybody else.
Spill the tea.
Yeah.
So yeah, no, definitely AI continues to be a focus for us. We either they're released or they're about to be released. So this might be news, but so we did introduce the AI connectors for Logic Apps Standard, the built-in versions of those connectors. We are now making those available for consumption. So those are either out or right around the corner from that perspective. So if you're using Logic Apps consumption, then those would be something that you can take advantage of. There's also some other built-in operations that we've been working on as well. Like, so for example, in our sample for the RAG pattern, we do need to tokenize a document, and we did provide sample code for you to do that in an Azure function. That's something that is going to be built in and just something that you can take advantage of natively. So expect more opportunities there. We've also done some work recently just with some other teams inside of Microsoft. So Azure OpenAI, that team, and they have an assistance feature that allows you to go ahead and call Logic Apps as a plugin. So that's some recent work that's taken place there. Same with Semantic Kernel, another Microsoft technology for orchestrating those LLM applications, and this ability to like reach out and, basically execute some transactional data, whether that's a fetch or whether that's a write. Logic Apps provides a good off-ramp to go do some of that work and be able to leverage our connectors and once again, like focus on speed from that perspective. So generative AI continues to be a big investment for Microsoft and certainly for us as we sort of participate in the overall ecosystem. Another item that we're actively working on is Logic Apps Hybrid. And so this is something we did talk about at Integrate. It's currently in what we call early access preview, or think of it like a private preview. That is something I do expect us to go public preview here shortly. And this is really the ability to run your Logic App workloads on customer managed infrastructure. And so that could be, on premises, if that's of interest to you. That could be in another public cloud, if that's of interest to you. But it does take advantage of Azure Arc, and it allows you to take advantage of that rich portal experience that we just showed earlier, the run history, even editing. All of that becomes available to you. That becomes consistent, and you can run these workloads kind of wherever you need to run them. And so the way we kind of think about this is an extension of Logic Apps Standard. You've got built-in connectors, and it becomes more of like a hosting conversation. It's like, where do I want to host this? And, we do have some customers that are coming from, BizTalk or other like on-premises traditional middleware platforms looking to sort of modernize their stack, but still have needs to run it on their infrastructure. That's really what this is there to solve. And then I think the sweet spot is really, we do have customers that already run some workloads in Azure. They do have some needs to run some workloads on premises. Oftentimes can be kind of confidential computing, R&D departments. Sometimes it's energy companies where they need like local network proximity. And it becomes this more of like, hey, we're all in on Logic Apps. We want to develop using the same tools. We want to then be able to manage using the same tools. And it really just becomes a different deployment. Instead of deploying to Azure, you deploy to a custom location that is hosted, in some other data center from that perspective. So pretty excited about that. That is something that, you should see some announcements here shortly. Another piece that we're working on is the data mapper. Basically, we're refreshing the UX. The back end remains the same, but we've gotten customer feedback. We're very interested in customer feedback, and then we've just been responding to some of the feedback that we've got about the V1 data mapper. So far, it looks awesome. Looks very promising, but that's something to keep your eyes open for as well.
Yeah, well, that's exciting to see. Yeah, it's quite impressive how rapidly you progress and add features within Logic Apps and just across the board with Azure. And we've talked a lot about that. I'm going to throw this over to you. We've talked a lot about not just moving integrations to Azure Integration Services or flows to Logic Apps, but just moving to Azure. And there's just so much that's happening there and so many more capabilities than what you just get in MuleSoft. Take it away, Derek.
That's a loaded question. Yeah, I think that's, for me, it's getting, when I build out my integrations, again, as an architect, I look to solve my customers' problems. It's all about capability, right? So you talked about some of the AI capabilities, and those are it's just the starting point, right? Like, we can have way more options around storage and things around, SQL and non-SQL based databases to help with your integration patterns and help you solutions. So for me, it's that. So it's always great to see, like, when I saw the business event tracking, and those things became real, because for me, as the person who would traditionally build those out, I don't need to anymore. The platform's handling it, moving me along as well. So from that perspective, I'm really appreciative.
And well, another thing I would say is identity and authentication is another one too, right? Like, back in the day, having to figure out all these different security schemes is always a nightmare. And I think with OAuth, that sort of improved that greatly. But I think even moving forward, another important concept is this notion of managed identity and this idea of getting rid of passwords. Because let's be honest, passwords are always cumbersome to manage. You have to worry about leakage. You have to worry about rotating. How annoying is it to do quarterly rotation of secrets or passwords, right? Horribly unproductive, but yet important. So you have to do it. So if you think about just the whole, I'm just going to call it Azure AD. I haven't switched the new name yet, but if you think about that whole infrastructure, and even in Azure, and being able to go, no, I'm trusting this resource with another resource, and these are the permissions that resource can do, and this is the only way it's accessible. And I don't have secrets. I don't have passwords. Obviously, we still support those if you need them, but that's not the preferred way. And now this idea is it's security and authentication is built into the platform because of that rich ecosystem inside of Azure itself. And so this is another thing where it's just how do we avoid paying taxes? Well, technical taxes. I would prefer not to pay taxes either.
Avoid paying taxes.
I don't want the CRA coming after you. But how do we avoid paying some of these technical taxes that are super important? They're table stakes. But let's just remove that busy work and let's make sure we are running secure by default. And then let's focus on solving the business problem. Because I'm sure we've all spent time in our career spending way too much time trying to figure out security when it should just be the easiest path, should be the simplest path, which should be the fastest path. And that's where things like managed identity is just checks all of those boxes, and it's the most secure too. So,
yeah, when we talk to our customers specifically about that conversation, it's this notion that the hackers in the world have nothing but time on their hands, and they're highly motivated, right? And we get so busy in our day to day that at times we're not highly motivated. We don't have a lot of time because we're attending meetings, we're dealing with new features we're trying to build. So anytime you can shift that responsibility is what we always look for, right? We don't want to take that on because, again, we look at the world and those bad actors out there, they're highly motivated and they got time, right? So how do we kind of combat that becomes the question and the conversation. Yeah,
well, that's good. Any other last minute questions before I move us along?
No, I appreciate it. This has been amazing.
Anything else you want to share?
I think just a plug. So we do have the Azure Community Stand-Up. We have a community event. Just going to double check the date here. Coming up on September 26th, 11 a.m. Pacific on YouTube, basically on the Azure Developers YouTube channel. So this is our Aviators Community Day. We've got about 4.5 hours of community content. And so a great way to learn about the latest features that are going on. And, we definitely embrace the community and encourage people to get to know each other and to contribute and sort of high water raises all boats. So
Yeah,
high tide raises all boats. So that's kind of the way we're looking at it. So we'd love to see more people go ahead and watch that. It's free. It'll be available on demand. So even if you can't catch it live, go ahead and check that out.
Yeah, it's such a valuable resource for the community, and the community is so active. So really, that's another segue into kind of our call to action. Really, if in this demystifying series, most of our audience here is MuleSoft. So, now that you're hearing a lot and you're kind of getting under the hood as to the features within Azure and the integration services that are provided there. I mean, if this is anything that's interesting to you, you've obviously got a ton of questions, and we just want to make sure that that we're here to ask those questions too. We mentioned in our previous video, we've got what we call a fast start assessment package, where we basically just dive into do a mini audit on your integrations within MuleSoft and just gain an understanding of what you've got, so that we can build out pricing on what that migration is going to look like if you need that help, and also the ongoing pricing, which actually our next video is on pricing, because a lot of the questions that we're getting is, okay, I like what you're telling me on the Azure side, especially the Logic App side. What's it going to cost? Like, give me a cost comparison. I know what I'm paying on MuleSoft now. What am I going to pay if I move over? So
Great question.
Yep, that's our next video. So anyway, really appreciate, Kent, you joining us, and look forward to having you again. But on that note, should we just get back to work?
Back to work.
Okay, let's do it. See you, Kent.
Yeah, thanks.
Get back to work, Kent.